Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm gonna share with you my top essential mixing techniques. Now I have different mixing techniques that I will apply depending of the track that I'm working on. But these mixing techniques that I'm gonna share with you today are the ones that I always use, independently of the track that I'm working on. Now before I start with this tutorial, there is few things that I wanna clarify. The first one is that for these different mixing techniques, I will be using some specific plugins, but it doesn't mean that you need to have these plugins. It all depends on how creative you are and the plugins that you already have. And the second thing that I want to clarify is that the demo project that I will be using for this tutorial is a melodic house. But again, it doesn't mean that these mixing techniques can be only applied for this style of music. It doesn't matter the type of music that you make, simply give it a try and let's see if some of these techniques also works for you. So now with that said, let's start with this tutorial. Okay, so let's have a look to the first essential tip. Now, if you are familiar with my videos, then you probably know already this tip. And you know that I always use it on my production. Now, this tip consists in adding a random top kick as a layer to your main kick drum. So if I go into the kick group and I open the group, in here you can see that I add a layer to the kick drum with this top kick, which follows the same pattern as the main kick drum. So if I double click on the top kick, in order to program this tip, I use FPC, which is a stock plugin of FL Studio. But if you use a different DAW, then I'm sure that you have a similar stock plugin to replicate this tip. Now on FPC, you can see that I'm only using a single pad. But if I fully open the plugin, in here I have 14 different top kicks. And in order to make it play randomly, simply enable these options, trigger overlapping layers randomly, then right click on it and select random. So now if I play in solo the top kick, let's have a listen to it. Obviously, it sounds weird, and that's because it needs some mixing. So if I open the mixer and I go to the top kick, the first plugin that I add is a FabFilter Pro Q3, just to get rid of unnecessary low and high frequencies. Now, you don't really need to cut the high frequencies. It all depends on the sound that you are looking for. But it's really important to get rid of the low frequencies to avoid phase issue with the main kick drum. The next plugin that I add is a Frequency Limiter, just to have a similar average peak level across all of the different top kicks. Next, Shaperbox 3, just to add texture. Next, a standard clip, one more time, just to have an average similar level across all of the top kicks. Then I add another FabFilter Pro Q3 just to get rid of the low frequencies due to the standard clip. And last, Valhalla Vintage Verb, just to add a bit of depth to the top kick. So now let's have a listen to the top kick without and with all of this process. Okay, and now let's have a listen to the kick group without and with the top kick. It's a subtle effect, but as I mentioned earlier, it adds variance to the kick drum and it makes it feel a bit more organic. So now let's have a look to the next essential tip. Okay, so I always apply this technique to my kick drums. The frequency range, it might be different depending of the kick, but normally I reduce the frequencies between 200 and 400 Hz. So here with the kick insert selected, the plugin that I always use to reduce this frequency is the API 550B. And for this particular kick drum, I select 400 Hz and I'm reducing 4 dB with the bell curve setting. So let's have a listen to the kick drum without and with this tip. Again, it's a subtle effect, but with the EQ enabled, the kick drum have a bit more punch and it sounds way cleaner. So one more time, this is a technique that I always apply to my kick drums. And now let's have a look to the next essential tip. Okay, so first of all, there is different ways to apply this technique to your production. But my favorite way, and the one that I always use, is with the noise module of a shaper box. So if I go to the insert of the clap number 1, in here I add the shaper box with the noise module. The reason why I always apply this technique with this plugin is because you have fully control over the noise. You have so many different type of noise. You also have a high pass and a low pass filter. You can modulate the noise, and you can also enable the envelope setting where you can control the attack, hold, release, etc. So again, this is definitely my favorite way to apply this technique. And another thing that I want to mention is that I apply this technique to different elements of a track. Depending on the track, I might apply this technique to the kick drum, to the clap and snare, percussion, cymbals, and also different instruments. On this track, I use this technique on the kick drum, clap and snare, in cymbals, and also chords and plugs. So I'm gonna start with the clap number 1. So I'm gonna put in solo the clap group. I'm gonna open the plugin and let's have a listen to the clap group without and with this technique. Okay, now let's have a look to the kick drum, but this time, instead of applying the technique to an individual insert, I apply the technique to the whole group. So if I select the kick group, in here I add a shaper box, again with the noise module. Now on the clap and snare group, I use a simple white noise, but in this case, for the kick group, the cassette B-side type of noise. So let me press play and let's have a listen to the kick drum without and with this technique. Okay, now let's have a listen to this technique with the cymbals. So if I go to the hi-hat close 1 insert, in here one more time I add a shaper box 3 with the noise module. So I'm gonna put in solo the hi-hat close 1 and let's have a listen to the hi-hat without and with this technique. Okay, and now let's have a listen to these essential tips on different music elements. So I'm gonna start with the chords. So I'm gonna put in solo the chords group, and then if I go to the chords bass, in here one more time I add a shaper box 3, but this time I'm using the noise module and also the crash module. Now for the crash module, I modulate the beats setting. And this time for the noise module, I'm using the crunchy static type of noise. So again, let me press play and let's have a listen to the chords without and with this tip. Okay, and last, let's have a listen to this essential tip on the plugs. So I'm gonna put in solo the plugs, and then if I go to the plug number 1, in here one more time, I add shaper box 3. This time I'm using a pouring rise type of noise only for the mid-high frequency with the envelope setting enabled. And I'm also modulating the mix knob with the peak controller with the shape of random. So let's have a listen to the plug without and with this essential tip. Okay, and now let's have a look to the next essential tip. Okay, this is a simple but really effective trick, which consists to saturate your cymbals. So if I go to the cymbals group, in here, the plugin that I always use for this tip is Decapitator by Sound Toys. Now, saturation is a powerful tool for mixing and sound design. And depending on the track, I may use saturation in different elements of the track. But for cymbals, it doesn't matter the track that I'm working on, I always apply this tip to my cymbals. So let's have a listen to the cymbals group without and with this tip. So with Decapitator enabled, it instantly improved the sound of my cymbals. And I just want to mention that I've learned this trick from the group Disclosure. And I have to say that I'm 100% agree with them. So now let's have a look to the next tip. Okay, so this tip pretty much consists to make your bass sound white while keeping the low frequencies in mono. And one more time, there is different ways to make your bass sound white. As a quick example, you can create your bass with two different layers, one being the low frequencies in mono and the second layer being the low mid frequencies with a white bass sound. But you have to be careful if you apply this technique in this way, as you might have some phase issue. Now, if I go to the bass number 1, my favorite way to make my bass sound white is with Micro Shift by Sound Toys. And the cool thing about the Micro Shift is that you have the focus knob. So if I click on it, in here you can see that I set the focus knob on 150 Hz. So this knob is pretty much a crossover point to decide where you want to start to apply the effect in terms of Hz. So below 150 Hz, it doesn't apply the effect, and above 150 Hz, it applies the effect. Okay, now in order to show you how effective is this knob, I'm gonna use two different analyzers. So I'm gonna go to the master tool channel, and in here I have two different analyzers. Ozone Imager 2, which is pretty much a vector scope or a stereo analyzer, and a span. Now the way I have configured span is that the white line are the mid frequencies or the mono frequencies, and the blue color are the side or the stereo frequencies of my mix. So I'm gonna put in solo the bass, and I'm gonna enable and disable the Micro Shift so you can hear and visualize how effective is this plugin. Okay, and now let's have a look to the next essential tip. Okay, so I like to call this essential tip as a sandwich of a clipper. And I always apply this technique to my drum bass. So here on the mixer with the drum bass selected, you can see that the first plugin that I add is a standard clip. Then I apply some effect for a drum bass like parallel compression, glue compression, EQ, etc. And the last plugin that I add on this chain is again the standard clip. So this sandwich pretty much much consists to first of all control the peaks of the drum bass group. Then I apply some mixing technique to glue the drum bass, to add punch, etc. And last, due to all of these mixing techniques, I also apply another standard clip to have fully control over the peaks, especially when the kick and the snare hit together. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play the drum bass and I'm gonna enable and disable those clippers, the first one on the chain and the last one on the chain. And in order to help you visualize this process, I'm also gonna open on the master tool channel the oscillos megascope so you can visualize the waveform of the drums. So let me press play and let's have a listen to the drum bass without and with this technique. Okay, and now let's have a look to the next essential tip. Okay, so this next essential tip I always apply to my drum bass, and it pretty much consists to apply saturation to the transients of the drums. And the way how I program this technique is using the drive or saturation module of a shaper box. So here with the drum bass selected, in here I have a shaper box 3, and if I open the shaper box, I'm using the drive module. This time I'm using the hard clipper style. And what I'm doing is, first of all, I select the length of the LFO in 8 notes. Next, I apply this curve just at the beginning, which pretty much add a bit of saturation to the transients of my drum bass. And last, I only apply this effect to the mid-high frequencies. So let's have a listen to the drum bass without and with this technique. So as you can hear, this is a really cool trick to add extra punch to your drums. But you have to be careful while using this technique, as you can definitely destroy the drum bass. So one more time, let me remind you few key aspects of applying this technique. The first one is to be subtle with the amount that you apply. As you can see in here, the drive knob, the maximum position is set on 8%. Next, be also sure that you don't apply this effect to the low frequencies, otherwise your kick drum might sound weird. And last, using the mix knob, you can control how much effect you apply to your drums. As you can see, I'm only applying 50% of this effect to my drum bass. Okay, and now let's have a look to the last essential tip. Okay, so this last essential tip pretty much consists of using a tremolo plugin, but in a very particular way. So personally, I use a tremolo plugin to achieve 2 different results. The first one is to add a bit of rhythm either to the drums or some rhythmic music elements. And the second one is to create rhythm or shape the sound source. So for this particular track, I'm applying this technique to the plugs and to the chords group. So let's start with the plugs. So here with the plug number 1 selected, the last plugin that I add is Tremolator and a Fruity Peak Controller, which controls the Tremolator plugin. Now Tremolator is a plugin by Sound Toys, and the reason why I use this tremolo plugin is because of all of the features that I have, especially when you click on the tweak knob and open these advanced features. So as you can see, I'm applying the tremolator with a grid following an 8th notes, and with the Fruity Peak Controller, I'm modulating the depth, or pretty much randomizing the depth. So let's have a listen to the plug number 1 without and with this effect. As you can hear, the tremolator add an extra rhythm to the plugs. Now you can achieve a similar result with the instrument itself. If I go to the plugs group and I open the plug number 1, in this case I'm using Diva. So what you can do is that you can assign an LFO to control the ADSR, and depending of the sound you can modulate either the decay or the release. But if I do it in this way, now if I close the Diva and I open the mixer, this effect will be not applied to the delay and the reverb. And in this particular case, I want to apply this effect after the delay and the reverb. So the tremolator is acting after all of the process. And now let's have a look to the chords group. And in here, as you can see, I'm using one more time Tremolator by Sound Toys. So if I open the advanced setting, in here I'm using again the 8th notes, but with a more accentuated shape. And I also add a Freety peak controller to modulate the depth in a different way as on the plug number 1. So let me put in solo the chords group and let's have a listen to the chords group without and with this effect. Okay, so now that we cover all of my essential top mixing tips, now let's have a listen to the track without and with all of these tips. Okay, so these are my top essential mixing techniques. I would love to know which are yours, so please let me know in the comments below. So that's all for me. Hope you like and learned something from this video. As always, if you have any question, please leave a comment below. Thank you very much for watching. My name is JonHut, and I will see you in the next one.